Hey guys, so today we are looking at an extra history series about World War One, my personal favorite of the two world wars so far, and we're gonna be looking at the full playlist from part 1 all the way to its final part 4. I usually separate parts, but today since they're so sometimes with extra history the parts are so short I really feel like I could just do it all in one sitting. So I'm just gonna give that a try today and see how it works out, see if anyone digs it or not. But yeah, so I've talked a lot about World War One on this channel. It is my favorite of the two world wars. I find it fascinating. Compared to even World War Two. I just love the definitely with World War II, things felt very much straightforward. The Nazis are the bad guys. I think most people with common sense can agree on that, and everyone needed a team up to stop Hitler, you know? Not to say it isn't interesting, it's just probably, there's so much coverage of World War II, especially here in America. Many countless movies and shows and stuff, so it's an era that's very, showed, and I kind of get tired of it mainly because I'm so exposed to it, and that's why I usually try to avoid World War II stuff on this channel. But World War One, by comparison, I feel like doesn't get enough coverage, and I feel like it is so interesting. I kind of like the grayness, at least compared to World War Two. The various alliances, the trench warfare, it's just like something about it. Oh, the introduction of so many, you know, innovative military weaponry, kind of like the tank. So, there's just so much that happened in this one war. It really was kind of like a cultural shift in the world, right? And it just changed everything. And I feel like even the writings, like All Quiet on the Western Front, some of the writers and poets and artists that emerged from this era are very unique in their expression. I think even Tolkien, I believe, was in this World War One. Don't quote me, please. Just get a fact check. Tolkien World. Okay. Okay, yeah, he took part in the First World War. So, like I said, I find it such an interesting era, and what came out of it also interesting. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing more about it, eh? With that said, oh wait, but first, if you want to watch the original, I'm just gonna put the playlist link. If you want to watch these videos, the link is down below. And if you enjoy my channel and want to help support me, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out, guys. It would really help my small but humble channel grow. And I would really appreciate it. With that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let's watch World War One, The Seminal Tragedy by Extra History.
Human history is equal parts heroism, tragedy, and misunderstanding. Very rarely have we displayed all three to such a degree as in the First World War. This war is called the seminal catastrophe of the 20th century, because without it there is no Stalin and no Hitler, no fascism or World War II. Without it, we don't have a Cold War that leads us to the very brink of annihilation, nor do we see the Middle East carved up by old men, still bitter from 4 years of meaningless self-inflicted catastrophe. Without this war, we probably don't have 9/11 or the turmoil in the Middle East today. This war ushered in the modern age, born in a crucible of gunpowder and toxic smoke and the blood of 10 million men. Blood spilt in war from the fields of France to the waters off America, from the Russian frontier to the sands of the Middle East, from the Chinese mainland to the deepest parts of the sea. This war broke empires. It shattered the past and forced us to give up our last ties to our medieval understanding. When the smoke cleared and a stunned world climbed out of its trenches, we lived in a new age, with new powers, new ideas, and new terrors. It is the defining event of the 20th century. It is the Great War. But it's not the war itself that we're here to talk about today. Hopefully, over the course of this show, a bit at a time, we'll slowly, story by story, cover the sprawling events of this turning point in history. But today we are focused on the events that led to this war. For if the war itself is the seminal catastrophe of the 20th century, then the weeks before the war are its seminal tragedy. In these next few episodes, we'll focus on the very human, very personal stories that led Europe to consume itself, to ignite itself in one suicidal blaze from which it still hasn't recovered, because it is a tragedy of the highest order. It's like a play, a Greek epic, A story so grand we would think it must be fiction if the scars of the war couldn't still be seen on the fields of France. It's Shakespeare living out before us. It begins with the death of a prince and his lady, and ends in mass slaughter the likes of which the world has never seen.
Our seat covers aren't just engineered
Gosh,
for comfort.
darn
Ford
it.
had to
Let's set the stage. For 100 years, Europe has been at peace. There have been wars, sure, but they were minor wars. Wars on the periphery. Wars without many of the great powers involved. Not since Napoleon did the great states of Europe vie in bloody battle. For after the ravages of the Napoleonic Wars, the statesmen of Europe had come together to try to stop such a catastrophe from ever happening again. They created a system called the Concert of Europe, so that whenever war seemed perilously close, the nations of Europe would come together in a conference, and instead come to a settlement that all parties would abide by. But Europe has changed since those weary of the Napoleonic
Yeah, there were wars, kind of like Prussia, its emergence, and the Franco-Prussian War, also Prussia against the Austrian Empire, and France under Napoleon III, participating in the independence of Italy against the Habsburg. Wait, I just named a bunch of conflicts that happened all in like one lifetime, but you get what I mean. There were conflicts, like he said. But again, compared to the Napoleonic War, probably not as grand. Like the in-between between Napoleon and World War One. While there were conflicts for sure, I don't want to like discredit them. Like they don't get as much like publicity as like Napoleon, obviously. So probably it is interesting though that despite these conflicts that did exist, the overall state is that, like he just mentioned, there definitely was a bit more peace, and for 100 years the system was, not the worst. So it is kind of like shocking just how the moment it broke, this happened, right? Yeah.
conflicts first came together to create the Great Concert. The first and most major change was the formation of Germany. At the time our story begins, it's important to remember Germany as a nation was only 40 years old. It's a young nation, a strong one, a nation looking to claim its own. But to say that Germany was a strong nation is to undersell the magnitude of its creation. I mean to say that the birth of Germany was something perhaps unique in the history of the world. For overnight, with the signing of a few papers, the middle of Europe was transformed from 1,000 tiny squabbling states to the greatest land power the world had ever known. In one night, suddenly the most powerful nations of Europe, Russia, France, Austria-Hungary, and England, were not the most powerful nations in Europe any longer. Overnight,
Yeah, and that's thanks to the efforts of Otto von Bismarck. We have seen the Otto von Bismarck series by Extra History. The man always had a plan, and like it really is amazing just how overnight Germany just popped up. Because it's so unique, the history of the Germanic people. Most of the history was them being broken. Different principalities, as it were. Prussia being one of them, and eventually, again, in very relatively near to our time, it formed into what we know as Germany. So, interesting fact, I actually have relatives in Germany. My grandpa's sister, I believe, moved there and started the German wing of our family, and so every few summers, our German relatives show up here. And, we kind of talk to them. So, yeah, like that's interesting. I guess I have ties to Germany in some way,
the very heart of Europe had been created a nation with more manpower, natural resources, and economic strength than any other nation in the world except perhaps for Great Britain. Moreover, this creation was cemented in the defeat of France, which at the time was considered the strongest land power in Europe. And at the time of our story, that defeat and its memory still run deep. And now, look at the world from the perspective of that powerful new German nation. Here they are, arguably the most powerful country in the world, and yet they see themselves being denied all the rights of a great world power. Britain and France held territories across the globe. Even the Netherlands, a nation which the might of the new Germany could wipe off the face of the earth in a week, had colonies from Asia all the way to Africa. But Germany, for all of their strength, had been denied those possessions simply because their nation was young. Imagine what this does to the balance of power. Imagine what this does to the geopolitical scene. Think what would happen today if, say, the entire EU declared themselves a single nation with a single economy, a single military, and a single foreign policy. Imagine if they said that they wanted greater access to Middle Eastern oil, and Russia and the United States said, no, we were here first. Imagine now if representatives from Russia and the United States smiled and told this young nation that they'd be happy to continue to sell them oil at an inflated price, though. This was the position Germany found itself in. How was the concert of Europe, a system built around a balance of power and compromise, to last in these circumstances? And yet, for 40 years, it did. And this brings us to the second major change since the Napoleonic Wars: the men. The 70 years after those wars was a time of giants, men who towered over the world stage. Time and again here, Europe rolled well on the dice of history and came up with leaders who were capable of navigating an increasingly complex and increasingly modern geopolitical world. In the 1800s, Russians saw men like Alexander II, who understood that Russia needed to modernize to survive. He began dismantling serfdom, reformed judicial practices, encouraged universities, and pursued peace, understanding that Russia was in no position to fight the major European powers. Like all the men here, this guy was not all chuckles and sunshine. Alexander II brutally suppressed revolutionaries and separatists in the territories Russia controlled. Still, he was effective, without question. By 1900, we have in Russia Nicholas II, a deeply reactionary, deeply conservative man who history records as being of middling intellect with neither the training nor the inclination to properly rule. His reign is a catalogue of embarrassing mismanagement. This is the man who fell under the sway of the mystic Rasputin. This is a man who couldn't even coordinate his own coronation.
Yeah, and like a bunch of people died in his own coronation. Talk about an awful start to your reign. Dude even admitted, like, with his own words, I don't have what it takes to rule. So that's already like, oh wow. I mean, at least he was self-aware to a degree, but problem is he kept trying to take, I guess, out of a duty, because he did view him, he was the Tsar, so he probably felt duty-bound anyway to have the absolute power. But, yeah, he still, you know, made some really bad decisions. And the thing is about Tsar Nicholas, I do kind of pity him, especially near the end. Like, you know, essentially brought the end of Russia, of the Imperial Russia, rather. And, the way him and his family went was really brutal, you know? The Romanov family's assassination, like, you know, like, again, like, I don't think he was a bad person, at least to those around him, obviously his family and whatnot, but he was a bad ruler, and not good for the Russian people. And I never want to, like, you know, ignore the people who suffered under his rule, but, you know, I can't help but kind of feel bad for the guy at times, especially near the end, you know?
A man who let 1,300 people die in a human stampede on the day he was crowned, because, I kid you not, there was not enough beer and pretzels. And this is the man who held a ball that day anyway, because, hey, why let a few hundred deaths spoil your day?
Oh my
This is the man who will, in the end, hold the fate of the world in his hands. And by this point in Austria, we have as emperor an 84-year-old man, 2 years away from his death and battered by the weight of the life he's led. His foreign minister, Berthold, is neither a bad man nor a stupid man, but he is a weak and vacillating man at a time when European politics are all about strength. And Germany? Germany, during the 20 years following its creation, had unquestionably one of the greatest diplomats the world has ever seen, Otto von Bismarck. This is a man of great ability and great appetites, a man known to smoke 3 cigars at once and down a bottle of champagne at breakfast, a man who probably deserves an entire episode just to himself, but for our purposes, he is the man who held the concert of Europe together under the incredible strain of the creation of the new German state. His life's work was to ensure that France and Russia never allied, so that Germany would never be surrounded. This was his nightmare, his greatest fear. And in this, like in many things, he turned out to be right. He famously said that the great European conflagration would come from some damn fool thing in the Balkans, and he warned Kaiser Wilhelm II that within 20 years, his bellicose policies would destroy the Kaiserreich. And he was correct almost to the day. But he was fired by Kaiser Wilhelm II, who has too much historical baggage to get an accurate view of. Suffice it to say that the Kaiser often ends up with a reputation for feeling inadequate. Having been born with a withered arm and grown up hounded by his mother, he came to believe that he had to prove he was masculine, and so set out to break with Bismarck's policies and show that he was his own man by abandoning the German alliance with Russia and moving Germany towards a
You know what's unique about this era is that I believe Kaiser Wilhelm The Tsar of Russia, Nicholas, and King George were all, I think, what, cousins or related from Queen Victoria? Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but I do believe that they were they had links to each other. I think I'm pretty sure they were related. Um, Cousins feels like the right word though. I should probably fact check some stuff. Um, but you know what I mean. And yeah, that was a pretty unique system, and how, you know, the two of them kind of brought about the end of their respected empires by trying to, you know, obviously with Kaiser Wilhelm, try to really prove himself, only to, yeah, lose Germany, and then Tsar Nicholas to try to beat the Tsar, try to handle all that absolute power, and then get himself, you know, overthrown. So it's kind of unique, these two, right? Especially if they are related. Maybe I should look at that. Wait, let me Google. George Nicholas and Wilhelm. Okay, wait. Sorry, I'm just trying to see. Okay, definitely related. Sorry, I have to fact check myself sometimes. Even when I get historical facts correct for the most part, I still always have like nervousness. Because I don't want to say, you know. So I do have to fact check myself even when I'm correct. So yeah.
Much more expansionist stance. He was known for being brash and impulsive, with little tact, crumbling the carefully balanced alliances that had for so long kept the concert of Europe in place. Now to all this, we have to add one last piece to the stage. Fear. The fear of the dying empires. The fear of those once great nations that now so clearly saw the shadow of death approaching them from behind. The Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire. The Ottoman Empire was long known as the sick man of Europe. Its decline had been long and slow, with the surrounding nations taking bites out of its carcass as it slowly died. The Austro-Hungarian Empire looked at the fate of the Ottomans and saw shadows of what was to come. They feared they'd be like the Ottomans, dismantled, taken apart piece by piece until they were too weak to fight back. They had once been the most powerful state in Europe, but they ruled over many nations and many peoples, and over the 19th century those peoples had asserted themselves, crying out for their own nations, crying out to be free, to, as people, decide their own fate. And so, through the 19th century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire saw its territory chipped away, as the other great nations of the concert of Europe ruled in their conferences that those people had a right to be free. And with each loss, those peoples that the Austro-Hungarian Empire still maintained control of agitated for their own freedom to a greater and greater extent, causing unrest that rocked the empire to its very core. And lastly, we have the Russians. The Russian Tsars ruled the largest country in the world, but, like the Ottomans, their military, economy, and infrastructure were woefully behind the times. And in 1905, when the Russians lost a war with the Japanese, the first time a European power had lost a war to an Asian one in modern history, their weakness became eminently clear to the world. This loss caused a revolution that forced the Tsar to accept a parliament and a constitutional monarchy. But it wasn't in the nature of Alexander II to accept a parliament, and he rebelled against these constraints, leaving his country precariously perched on the verge of revolution. So with a new superpower in the midst of Europe, fear driving crumbling empires to irrational and desperate decisions, and a group of leaders simply not equal to their forebearers at the task of guiding the ships of state, the players are all in place. The stage is set, and the curtain begins to rise on the war to end all wars. Join us next time for an
Alright, part 2 now. Let's jump to it.
Congested and couch-ridden with a bad case of sickness, snap.
Alright, the stage is set. Now let's put the players in their places. The curtain opens on the back of a rundown cafe in Belgrade. A young man comes in carrying a package and takes a seat at a table with a handful of other young men huddled around. They still to a hush as he opens the package. Inside is a single piece of paper, a newspaper clipping. The one who brought the package bends over to stare at the page. One of the other young men slides a candle across the table so he can better see. Before him, circled in red, is a headline, and it reads, Archduke Franz Ferdinand to visit Sarajevo.
Yeah, I had heard that like Archduke Franz Ferdinand mapped out the trail he was going to, which gave them a chance to even plan this. Not sure, but I heard something like that. If that's true, then yeah, that's Eesh. And this is the Serbian Black Hand, right? Which had to do with his death.
Now we skip ahead a few weeks. We're outside a palace. A resplendently dressed man and woman are getting in an open-top car, 100 years ago this year. He's dressed in bright, blazing blue. His chest is full of medals. On his head, a grand horsehair cap. She is wearing a flowing white dress and laughing. He helps her into the car. This is Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria, next in line for succession to the throne, accompanied by his wife Sophie. They've come to Sarajevo to watch military maneuvers, but really that's an excuse. It's their anniversary. They've come to get away from the stifling courts of Austria, where the Archduke's marriage to Sophie will never be accepted due to her low birth. She was, after all, only a countess. But things have been really tense in this part of the empire. The Serbian agitators have been acting with increased boldness to demand a Serbia free and independent from Austrian rule. And this day, of all days, falls on the anniversary of one of the greatest battles in Serbian history, the Battle of Kosovo. It's one of the great rallying points of the Serbian people, a point of national pride. To Serbian national...
I did not know about Okay, it's good to get more insight into the Black Hand's motives. I feel like most videos we covered from World War I kind of just skim over why Serbia, or the Black Hand rather, did this. They're like, okay, the Black Hand, they wanted to murder, Franz Ferdinand, and they did. Now let's get to World War One. I'm actually happy for once. He's so far, Extra History is the only YouTuber to actually kind of start going more in depth about the motives and the national pride, and even this anniversary happening here, so thank you, Extra History.
This is one of their proudest days. And to them, for the Archduke of Austria, the symbol of their oppression, the embodiment of foreign rule, to come here on that day was the greatest insult. Now, perhaps the Archduke had chosen that day to show solidarity, to ease tensions, to make the people of Serbia understand that he cared about their traditions. Maybe he simply didn't know that the day had any special importance, and he was just there to get away.
That's the one.
But whatever the reason, he was ill-informed. For on any other day, the events that are about to play out may not have happened. On any other day, this might have turned out simply to be your average parade, an event which wouldn't even go down as a historical footnote in a long and prosperous rule. But something had to happen on this day. It was too symbolic, too important, too grand of a story. And so the first domino is placed in the mad and improbable events of this 28th day of June 1914. So here now, in the sleek black car, the royal couple begins to process down the streets of Sarajevo, flanked by 5 other cars filled with officials and guards. It's a parade. The streets are lined with onlookers. The route has been published. The world knows exactly where the Archduke is going to be.
The route.
And those young men from that cafe in Belgrade are there in that crowd. They are nationalists. They're patriots. They're assassins and terrorists. They call themselves Young Serbia, and are part of the much more ominously named Black Hand. And they are angry. Angry in the way that only young men can be. And when I say young, I mean that barely any of them had reached the age of 20. They had in them an anger born of ideals, or they had ideals to...
Yeah, they were really young. Dang. Still kind of kids, like, wow.
rationalize their anger. A boldness born of a cause, or a cause to justify the brash kind of risk-taking that truly borders madness. But however you view them, here they were, hidden in the crowd, intent on killing the Archduke. One by one, the Archduke's car passes his would-be assassins. Nothing happens. No attempt on his life. 2 of his assassins ended up succumbing to fear and couldn't go through with the deed. One felt pity for his wife sitting in the car and just couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. Another one had an equipment malfunction. And so, one by one...
Dang, man. It kind of reminds me of Julius Caesar's assassination, where some of the conspirators, like, of the majority of the conspirators, most of them didn't actually stab Caesar. Like, only like a few did, of the grand total of the conspirators. So, yeah, I guess at the moment, some people just don't have that killing instinct,
One, Ferdinand passed them, none the wiser, smiling and waving to the crowd. Smiling and waving in an open-top car so the world could better see. But at last, on the Commercia Bridge, an assassin finally steps forward and throws a bomb at the Archduke's car. Seconds before it lands, Ferdinand sees it and dives behind the door of the car as the bomb passes over him and bounces into the street behind. An explosion rips through the ground, mangling the car following them and leaving 20 people wounded and bleeding on the street. The assassin leaps over the side of the bridge to make his escape, but in the type of amateurish planning that would be comical if the circumstances weren't so grave, he fails to realize that the river below is only 4 inches deep, and he hurts his leg in the fall.
Oh my
in
gosh.
one last act of comic tragic bravado, The assassin swallows the cyanide pill he's been carrying, a final "you'll never take me alive" gesture, but alas, these young high school assassins had bought their suicide pills on the cheap, and this one was way past its shelf life. So the young man just sits quietly vomiting into the river while the police stroll down to take him very much alive.
Okay. Alright, that's interesting. I'm telling you, history's funny at times. It's just unfortunate that it's happening right now in like one of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century, but man. Again, they're kids still, you know? You're not even like 21 yet. Yeah, like definitely a lot of passion and fire as you would expect from, you know, young people, but they're no, not the greatest planning, obviously, you know?
The motorcade races back the way it came, sirens screaming, and the city begins to lock down. Another of the young men, a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip, watches the cars go by, heart sinking. So it's done, he thinks to himself. It's off. The Archduke is alive. The assassination...
That's the wildest thing about this assassination, is that it could have been prevented. Like, the bomb thing failed, but the thing is, like, I believe Franz Ferdinand decided to, like, go to the hospital to visit the wounded. Nice gesture. Nice guy. Unfortunately, I think he happened to run into an assassin who was just happened to be there, and then he got shot. Again, like, if only he had fled right then and there and gotten out while he could, dude could have lived. Things would have been forever altered, you know? So... that's kind of the most tragic part. We almost had a chance to avoid it, you know?
Failed. He is pretty bummed out. His hopes to be immortalized in the halls of Serbian heroes are dashed. All his dreams of glory just shattered. Overall, it's been a pretty lousy day. So he goes off to pout, thinking maybe a snack will make me feel better. This one young man's comfort snack may seem like a small thing, but it's on the small things that history often turns. Back at City Hall, the Archduke and the mayor are having words. The mayor proposes that the Archduke and Duchess should continue on their trip, but the Archduke thunders back something like, "Are you crazy? You'd have us visit museums while bombs explode on your streets?" And then, in a gesture of gallantry that you don't often see anymore, he proposes instead that they immediately visit the hospital where the wounded were taken after the attack. So they don't hide him in a bunker or spirit him out of the country with a small army of guards like we would do today. Instead, they all pile out to the motorcade and start off towards the hospital.
Again, nice guy. Like, the fact that he thought of visiting them, like, you probably don't hear that much, like, again, like, nowadays, so that was nice, but yeah, he should have gotten the heck out while he could.
But nobody remembers to tell Franz Ferdinand's driver, and I should mention that this is the Archduke's personal chauffeur. Now, this fellow came along with the Archduke for the trip, but he's Austrian through and through. This guy does not know his way around Sarajevo. And so, as they're making their way through the city, the Archduke's driver makes a wrong turn onto Franz Joseph Street, a street named for the Archduke's father. Meanwhile, our failed assassin, Gavrilo Princip, is sitting outside a deli, eating his consolation snack and starting to feel maybe a little better. And maybe this won't be his only chance, he thinks. Maybe someday he'll have another shot at greatness. I mean, it was a really bad day, but who knows, it could still turn out okay.
Oh no.
You have to go into hiding for a while, but holy is that the Archduke? Yes, right there in front of him, in the same open-topped car, was the Archduke and his wife. The driver had taken a random wrong turn onto the street where Gavrilo...
Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, dude, just the way it could have been avoided. It's like almost like fate conspired to have this man murdered. Well, also because Franz Ferdinand didn't get out while he could have. I'm paranoid, dude. If I almost got killed, I would want to leave that city and never return. I'd be like, get me out of here now. I don't want to. I'll send them a card from, you know, from my palace. All the people wounded. I'll send them a get well card. I just need to get out of here. Oh. That's messed up, but you know what I mean? Just like, man, it's a bit of fate, but also just a bad call from Franz Ferdinand. It's kind of a combination of both, actually, if you think about it.
Princip was having a sandwich, and their car had just stalled out trying to back up.
Oh my gosh.
3 strides away. Gavrilo can hear the Archduke and his wife talking from the car. No words, just actions. He stands up, he pulls out his pistol, and he fires 2 shots that change the world. The Archduke looks over, barely noticing the gendarmes wrestling the young man by the car to the ground. His only sight is for his wife, lying quietly on the floor of the car.
Oh.
He reaches out with a hand weak and heavy. Something's wrong with his neck. He can't quite think straight. He sees her and he utters one last wish. Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Live for our children. A man leans over him and asks if he's badly hurt, and he thinks he says, "It's nothing. It's nothing." He repeats the phrase, each time a little more quietly, and neither of them live through the hour. And so, our first act is done. A martyred prince and princess, or the death of oppressors. An act of terror or a heroic strike for freedom. An act that relied on 1,000 coincidences. On a poorly chosen date, on a change of plans, on a misinformed drive.
Like I said, it's like that's like destiny conspiring for your death in some degree, right? It's almost like it was meant to happen. Fate really wanted Franz Ferdinand dead. Take me out. Side note, I really love that song from the band Franz Ferdinand. Take Me Out. That's what the song is called, right? Take Me Out. Franz Ferdinand. Yeah, a real banger song. Look it up. Take Me Out by Franz Ferdinand. I'm sorry. Let's get back to this.
Driver, and on a sad young man having a sandwich. But no matter how you look at it, it was an act that began the greatest war in history, and brought to an end the world that all of these actors knew. This war would change the world. Join us next time and find out how the world responds to this event.
Okay, so jumping to part 3.
The 5th of July, 1914. The Archduke and Duchess are dead. Gavrilo Princip is in jail, but catastrophe is not yet certain. Act 2 begins. We open on an Austrian delegation arriving in Potsdam. It is now a week after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. The Austrians want to take action. They want war with the Serbs, who they think are behind the group of ragged young men that actually pulled the trigger. But before they can have their war, they decide they must consult with their much stronger ally, the German Empire. So they send a delegation to Potsdam to meet with the Kaiser, Wilhelm II. They've been restrained before by Germany, held back from acting in the Balkans, so they need to know what Germany plans to do. They go to the Kaiser and tell him that this is intolerable, that they cannot abide such a humiliation, that they cannot let this act of terrorism go unpunished. And the Kaiser says to them, "We'll back you whatever you do. Just act and act quickly. Germany is behind you, without reservation." The Kaiser thinks that general war can be avoided, that if the Austrians strike while all of Europe is enraged over this assassination, if they act while the brutal slaughter of the Archduke and Duchess is still fresh in people's minds, no one will raise a finger to defend Serbia. And even if the Russian Empire decided that they wanted to protect their Serbian allies, if the Austrians can strike quickly, it'll be a fait accompli. The war will be over before the Russians can mobilize their forces. This is what he thinks as he tells the Austrian delegation that they have a blank check, that Germany will back them whatever they do. And then, he goes on vacation.
If only they knew. If only he knew that it would not be that easy. Or that quick. So, that's another... yeah.
On a boat for 3 weeks where he can't be reached. So the Austrians come home, German assurances in hand, but in Austria there's disagreement. The Hungarian part of their empire initially objects to war. They hope that a peaceful solution might be found, but their voice is alone. Where were the other voices of reason, or the other arguments for peace? Dead on the streets of Sarajevo. The Archduke was perhaps the greatest defender of the Serbs in the empire, and so when moderation was called for, the parties for war simply had to point to his death and say, "He was their greatest friend, look what they did to him, what do you think they're gonna do to us?" And all arguments were quelled. So at last, the Hungarians relented on one condition, a condition that'll be important later, that the Austro-Hungarian Empire would not annex a foot of Serbian land. And with that, the Austrians began drafting an ultimatum to Serbia. But this ultimatum is delayed by a chance for peace. Two men, rivals in the heart of Serbia, in Belgrade, the very capital in the center of this crisis, are two of the only men farsighted enough to see the clouds gathering on the edge of Europe. They are the ambassador from Austria and the ambassador from Russia to Serbia. They both have come to the same conclusion about where this storm will end, so they plan to put aside their differences and meet to perhaps work out a plan for peace. On the 10th of July, the Russian ambassador arrives at the house of the ambassador from Austria-Hungary. The details are agreed to, the plan is set, all that's left is one final meeting to perhaps smooth out tensions, to avert world war. They talk, they take cigarettes, both sides are open, things are going well, and then wham! The Russian ambassador falls dead of a heart attack. Nothing signed,
Oh.
no war stopped. The Serbians blame the Austrians. Rumors circulate that they had the Russians.
Oh my gosh. Dude, I'm telling you, it's almost like fate wanted this to happen. Like, is it me or is it kind of eerie to anyone else? Like, some of the stuff, how this could have just... you could say that a lot about human history and war, though. How easy things could have been avoided, only if a small different decisions were made. I guess you can say that with most of human history. But it's also very eerie in this video, in this series. Just like, oh, we were so close several times, and it just kept going. It's like, man, like I'm telling you, fate wanted this to happen. It feels like that, you know? It's kind of terrifying and eerie.
Ambassador assassinated, that the Austrian ambassador killed him in his own house. Worse still, this leaves the Russians without an ambassador in Serbia. As events begin to accelerate toward war, they have no diplomatic channel at the center of everything.
Oh, no.
No lines of communication, no eyes or ears on the ground. They have nobody with the experience, connections, or familiarity with Serbia that the former ambassador had to send out. And even if they did, it'd take weeks to get them appointed and shipped from Moscow to Sarajevo. Weeks they don't have. But with this last overture turning to catastrophe, the Austrians decide it's finally time to send their ultimatum. But they can't. Again, they delay. You see, President Poincaré, the leader of France, is going to Russia to meet with the Tsar, and the Austrians, ever nervous, decide that they can't send the ultimatum while their two greatest adversaries are meeting together in the same place. It would never do. They could make decisions too quickly. They could coordinate in ways they normally couldn't when they're 1,000 miles apart. So the Austrians delay. They wait until Poincaré is 100 miles out to sea before sending their ultimatum. But at last, on the 23rd of July, an ultimatum is sent, from the Austrians to the Serbs. The Serbs have 48 hours to agree to all points or face war. The ultimatum asks many things, but most of all, it asks that Austrian police be granted free rein to investigate the assassination on Serbian soil. This is impossible. To agree to such a thing is tantamount to giving up sovereignty. No nation would accept this. But that's alright, because the ultimatum is only a ruse anyway, a cover for what the Austrians...
Yeah, I've often heard about this too. The conditions imposed by Austria, I always heard, were meant to be rejected. The war was the goal. So yeah.
Austrians really want. The Austrians want war. They want the ultimatum to be rejected, because they want to appear to the world as though they gave the Serbs a chance to avoid a conflict. They want to appear blame-free for the invasion they're planning. And here's where things begin to speed up. Europe begins to boil. Up until this point, the crisis in the Balkans is just another event on the world stage, but all of a sudden, with the release of this ultimatum, people start to clue into what's happening. Powers outside of Austria, Germany, and Serbia begin to pay attention. But for us, we're going to turn our attention to one man, Sergei Sazonov. Sergei Sazonov was the foreign minister of Russia, and for him, the 24th of July is about to be a very, very busy day. In the morning, he wakes to receive the terms of the ultimatum that Austria sent to Serbia. He reads quietly to himself, then turns to an aide and fatefully utters, "It's a European war." A cabinet meeting is hastily assembled. The highest levels of the Russian government are all there. They resolve to ask the Austrians to give the Serbs more time, while at the same time pushing the Serbs not to resist the Austrians. They also make the fateful decision to begin a partial mobilization of their forces along the Austrian border, trying to play all the angles at once in the schizophrenic chaos that seemed all too common in the days just before the war. Now it's noon. Sazonov takes lunch with the French and British ambassador. The French ambassador reiterates France's complete support. The British ambassador says that Britain sympathizes but that he can't make any commitments. Now it's afternoon. The Russian ministers reconvene. With Sazonov confirming the unwavering support of the French, they decide to fully back Serbia, even to the point of war. And now it's evening. Sazonov meets with Portales, the ambassador from Germany. Portales begs Sazonov to call off Russian mobilization. He tells him that there must be solidarity between the monarchies, that they must work together or all fall alone. The argument gets heated. Portales tells Sazonov there will be revolution. Revolution in Europe if the monarchies do not work together. If they don't work together, all the crowns will fall. And he's right. Within 5 years, all the great monarchies of Europe, true monarchies, monarchies where the monarch was the head of state, would collapse. Within 5 years, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, and the German Empire would...
Dude, yeah, the amount of fall, like, that's another part I love about World War I and find so fascinating. It was the end of, like, monarchies and empires for a lot of the world, you know? So it really is just such a unique event, you know?
Be no more. Their kings dispossessed, thousands of years of monarchical tradition burnt away in the fires of cataclysmic war. Then something tragic happens. It's one of those small tragedies that lines the path to the First World War, those things that tear you up as you read about these events with perfect hindsight. It's one of those moments that almost makes this seem like a script, like a high drama constructed for the stage, until you realize how real it is, real enough to wipe out a generation. For you see, Sazonov utters the words, "If Austria-Hungary swallows Serbia, we will go to war."
Oh
Did you
my
catch
gosh.
it? If not, that's alright, neither did Portales. Poor Portales, who so desperately wants to avoid war. You see, Russia's main concern was that Austria would annex Serbia. If the Austrians planned to conquer Serbia, then it had to be war. But remember earlier, when the Austro-Hungarians were arguing among themselves about the ultimatum, that Hungarian element wouldn't lend its voice to war unless the other members of the Austro-Hungarian Empire agreed that they would not annex a foot of Serbian soil. Well, nobody told Portales. He was the German ambassador, not the Austrian ambassador, and somehow the memo never got to him that the Austrians had no plans to actually take over Serbia. So in their whole discussion, he never gets to communicate this to Sazonov. This may be one of the last moments where the world could have avoided this war.
Oh my gosh.
Portales impassioned, begging for peace, Sazonov firmly stating the Russian case, the two diplomats meeting in the quiet St. Petersburg night. But the world hinges on small things, and in that gentle night, one of the last the world would know for years, the opportunity is missed. The hands of fate tighten around the neck of Europe. The next day, the Austrians...
Like I'm saying, man, that's tragic.
...reject demands that they extend the deadline. The Kaiser at last decides to return to Germany, and 2 minutes before the ultimatum expires, the Serbians send Austria their reply. But that's a story for next time. We'll see you then.
Alright, let's jump to the next part.
The 24th of July, 1914. It's late at night. A group of haggard-looking men sit in a dim room in the ministry in Belgrade. One of them holds the Austrian ultimatum in his hands. They've spent the day debating how to reply. Defeated, they are about to give in to all demands. A notice slipped under the door. It says that the Russians have started to mobilize. They change their reply, and the final act begins. In their reply, the Serbians agree to 9 out of 10 Austrian demands. They only refuse to allow Austrian officials to have police powers within Serbia. But their reply is a masterstroke, an act of genius in the way it concludes. For at the end, it says that if the Austrians don't find their terms to be fair, the Serbians are more than willing to submit to the resolution of a conference. But if you'll remember, the Austrians hate conferences. They are always getting outvoted at those things. Well, no more, not this time. They are livid at the Serbian reply, but like always, they turn to their German allies for advice. The Kaiser is still at sea, so Austria's foreign minister Berthold goes to consult Bateman Holwig and Moltke, the head of the German army. They're apoplectic. They say, "What, you haven't declared war already? A month has gone by, get on with it. This isn't what we agreed to. We're losing the sympathies of the people of Europe." You see, after the assassination of the Archduke...
Yeah, they really thought that, like, okay, if you strike now while everyone's upset... You know, that's interesting. What if, like, Austria had just... Like, what do you think would have happened if Austria immediately, like, a week after this assassination, when it was really, really, like, hot, if they had just struck Serbia? You think, like, you think that would have just started the war quicker, or do you think, like, things would have been different? Let me know. I kind of want to know what you speculate from. What would happen if they had moved quickly?
Public opinion in Europe weighed heavily against Serbia. It was politically impossible for anybody to support them then. But now a month has passed, and this reply, this meeting of most of the Austrian demands, and this offer for mediation...
Yeah, that really was a genius move on Serbia's part, though. Like, really, they turned the tables. Now they seem like the more reasonable of the two, right?
Made the Serbs seem like the reasonable party. After all, what more could Austria want? So, with the rebukes of the Germans driving him, Berthold returns to Austria-Hungary, and for the first time speaks with Konrad von Hötzendorf, the chief of staff of the Austrian army. He too is apoplectic. What, declare war? Are you kidding me? You needed to tell us weeks ago if that's what you wanted to do. The Austrian army won't be ready for war until the 14th of August, weeks from now. Plus, we don't even know who we're mobilizing against. You want us to prepare for war with Serbia? Yeah, not when Russia's mobilized against us, we aren't. Get us a guarantee of Russian neutrality, and then maybe we can talk about mobilizing against the Serbs. Despondent, pressured toward war by the Germans, told that Austria isn't ready by his own chief of staff, Berthold returns home and begins to think. As the hours grow later, he starts to convince himself. There's a way out of this. He starts to reason that declaring war isn't necessarily the same as being at war, and so maybe if he declares war now, he'll placate the Germans and be able to use that threat to get the Serbs to capitulate before he even needs the Austrian army to be ready to fight. Now, we can all see this.
Yeah, that sounds like it can backfire spectacularly. And knowing that the war happens, it did. Oh man, yeah, that's not the brightest idea, I feel.
For the desperate rationalization that it is. We've all at one time or another gotten ourselves into an impossible situation and let ourselves believe in some wild, harebrained solution that'll surely fix everything. Only when we do that, the fate of the world isn't usually hanging in a balance. And so, on the 28th of July, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, with Berthold all the while believing he's going to bring peace by declaring war. But that morning, the morning of the 28th, Kaiser Wilhelm II got back to Potsdam. That very morning, the Kaiser read the Serbian response to the Austrian ultimatum and uttered, "With this, every reason for war drops away." And here is one of the great tragedies of those frantic July days leading to the war. This man, Wilhelm II, for all his inadequacies, for all his failings, for once in his life steps up and tries to become the man he should be, the man who deserves to rule the most powerful nation in the world. And he comes so close. And yet, despite his best attempt, he's too late. The world doesn't reward his effort, things spiral into chaos, war comes, and his empire will fall.
Yeah, talk about a really inopportune time to not be around, right, on his ship. He was off partying or doing whatever. Dude, that's like one of the worst, times to be away. Dang. Everything just comes together. I love this series. Everything just comes together to bring about the end of everything, you know?
The Kaiser tries to open peace talks, perhaps even hold a conference, but the Austrians will have none of it. So he proposes a novel solution: halt in Belgrade. Belgrade, the Serbian capital, is just a few miles from the Austrian border. If the Austrian army occupies the capital, they can declare victory and save face while showing the rest of Europe that they don't plan to annex Serbia. And they can do it quickly enough to perhaps keep the Russians out of the war. But this proposal has to go through Bateman, and Bateman's in Berlin. Now get this, it's 1914, so as impossible as it seems, there was no telephone line between Berlin and Potsdam, so Bateman can't reply directly. He's pretty skeptical of the halt in Belgrade plan, but instead of making the drive to Potsdam for clarification, he passes it along to German agents in Austria with the instructions not to press the Austrians too hard to adopt it. And he doesn't even mention that it comes from the Kaiser himself. Meanwhile, in Russia, Sazonov gets reports of Austrians shelling Belgrade. These reports are false, of course. The Austrian army won't be ready to do anything until August 14th, but he has no way of knowing that. So he, one of the last men opposed to full Russian mobilization, lets the dam break and declares himself for a full mobilization of the Russian army. He and the Russian chief of staff, Yanushkevich, go to see the Tsar and convince him that the time has come. General mobilization is ordered. Night falls. It's 1 a.m., and the Tsar can't sleep. He sends a telegram to the Kaiser of Germany, and it reads thus: "Am glad you are back. In this serious moment, I appeal to you to help me. An ignoble war has been declared to a weak country. The indignation in Russia shared fully by me is enormous. I foresee that very soon I shall be overwhelmed by the pressure forced upon me and be forced to take extreme measures which will lead to war. To try and avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you in the name of our old friendship to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far. Nicky." Now you have to remember that these two men were cousins. They were friends. All the avenues of diplomacy had failed. All the standard bureaucratic mechanisms of the state were driving them to war, so they reached out to one another as cousins and as friends to see if the two of them, dealing directly person to person, could avoid this war. And in a touch that could only come from these twilight days of empire, did they not refer to each other as Tsar or Kaiser. They don't even refer to each other as Wilhelm and Nicholas, but rather as Willie and Nicky. The Kaiser is awake too, and he responds.
That's
a flurry
nice.
of telegrams get sent back and forth. At the end of these correspondences, Nicholas picks up the phone, calls Yanushkevich, and tells him to call off the general mobilization. Yanushkevich splutters and starts to reel off all the things that canceling mobilization means they're going to have to do, but the Tsar says, "Cancel it," and hangs up the phone. On the morning of the 30th, Sazonov hears what the Tsar has done. He's shocked. He pulls in the head of the Duma, the Russian parliament, and the patriarch of the Orthodox Church, and they go in for a knockdown, drag-out meeting with the Tsar. The room is crowded, it's hot, talks are getting nowhere, And then Nicholas moves off alone, staring out the window at St. Petersburg, trying to think. After a few minutes of reflection, coming to no conclusion, a young man, an aide-de-camp, standing near the Tsar, says, "Majesty, we know how difficult it must be for you to decide." Without intention, these words cut. Nicholas had always been called a weak, indecisive, checklist leader.
Oh,
and he
no.
hated it. He wanted to shake off all those names people had been calling him for so many years. He wanted to show the world he wasn't some wishy-washy prince who couldn't make up his mind. And so, like that, with the words of some aide-de-camp whose name history has forgotten, Nicholas turns around and says, "I will sign the order." Back in Germany, Bateman's finally...
Oh, man. Oh, dude, that sucks so hard. All of this sucks so hard, man. I'm the term tragedy that he uses in the title of this series is perfect, because this really is just tragic. A series of tragic events that could have been stopped. Wow.
come around. They're starting to make progress with the Austrians on the halt in Belgrade plan. The British have even said that this plan has their support. But Berthold won't accept it. Can't accept it unless the Russians agree to halt their mobilization. And here we hit the catch-22 of the First World War. This is the age of the train, the period where logistics and timetables dominated military thinking. All around Europe, it was thought that if you could just get your army to the battlefield while the other guy's forces were still arriving, you'd crush them every time. You'd win without contest. And as we've seen with the Austrians, mobilization can take weeks. It is a Herculean task to coordinate and move the millions of men that made up a modern army. And if Russia acquiesces and has her army stand down, they will be impossibly behind. If they stop mobilization, and then Austria or Germany decide to attack, they'll have lost the war without even a fight.
Wow.
So Russia cannot stop mobilization. But if Russia mobilizes, that means Germany has to mobilize too or face the same dilemma. And now with Germany mobilized, what can France do but mobilize themselves? After all, the Franco-Prussian War taught them a hard, bitter lesson about what happens when you get your army to the field too slowly, and they will not be making that mistake again. And so the dominoes start to fall. But there's one last attempt, one last try to stop that crushing chain of causality leading the world inexorably to war. Portales, the poor German diplomat playing a bit part in a tragedy that he has the desire but not the means to avert, has one last meeting with Sazonov. He says to Sazonov, call off the general mobilization. And Sazonov says no. Portales pleads, for God's sakes, there will be no winner in this war. If we fight, it'll be revolution. It will be the end of monarchy. It'll be the end of us both. Won't you please call off this madness? And Sazonov says no. Portales drops to his knees and says, if you do this, it will be slaughter. I beg of you, in the name of all that is right and decent, call off this mobilization. And Sazonov says no.
Oh my
then
gosh.
Portales rises to his feet and takes a piece of paper from his pocket and says, in that case, sir, I have the honor to inform you that we're at war. He's still struggling to collect himself, saying, never thought I'd be leaving Russia like this. I don't know how I'll be able to pack. Sazonov kindly offers to send somebody to help gather his things. And a month later, 1 million men are dead. The Seminal catastrophe has begun.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the...
Yeah, obviously, I was very aware of, everyone usually says, oh man, if only Franz Ferdinand hadn't been assassinated, everything could have been avoided. And yeah, that is a big part, but seeing all these other aspects of the war where it could have been avoided, if just different decisions were made, it really is just sad. But I guess that's just human history in a nutshell. Just this one had the special distinction of being incredibly violent with a really high kill count.
Crosses row on row that mark our place.
Yeah, this is very new from Extra History. This is a very early, Extra History. I can tell from the animation and some stuff, so, yeah, I don't... He doesn't usually do this, at least from all the other series, but... I guess he's trying to, you know, drill in the point of how really, tragic this whole situation is, you know? That was another great series by Extra History, my friends. And we'll stop right here. Rip to all the brave men who died, you know, all the people who died in World War I, man. Tragic.